Hi, hello, and welcome back to this week's episode of the CeMAP Study Podcast, where me and my best mate Maria help you get through your CeMAP studies without falling asleep in your textbook or without repeatedly failing spectacularly, and we do it totally for free. So we're just here for the fun, and hopefully you're just here for a bit of education.
That's the hope anyway. If you're tuning into this just for shits and giggles, welcome anyway.
Yeah, I'm Charlotte.
I'm Maria.
And we do this every so often to brighten up your day, your CeMAP studies. I don't know. Basically, Maria took my coffee.
Oh, it's my fault.
So I like a coffee in the morning, but yesterday Maria didn't have any coffee, and I said, that's fine, pal, just jump over the wall, take mine, it's no problem. And I expected her to return it, and in fact she did not return it, and she woke up stressed about the fact that she didn't return the coffee, and I said, it's fine, don't worry about it,
and
I'll be fine.
Now it's not fine, and I'm about to be fired.
Yeah, now I realise that actually that caffeine makes a big difference before we do these podcasts. But this week is going to be a really good one because we are going to be focusing on the tax stuff in CeMAP 1.
Ooh.
Which is not sexy for literally anyone other than me. Oh, that sounded like it really hurt.
It's fine.
I really like teaching this topic purely because people really fucking hate studying this topic. And apparently that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Oh, okay. I'm here for it.
So this is all to do with topic 4 of CeMAP 1. So chapter 4 of your CeMAP 1 textbook.
Right.
And we talk about capital gains tax,
Ooh.
inheritance tax,
Ooh.
2 things called a potentially exempt transfer and a chargeable lifetime transfer.
Don't stop.
And then and then we're going to finish talking about the difference between stamp duty land tax, which is the one you pay on houses, and something called stamp duty reserve tax, which we might not have heard of before, but we're going to know what it is by the end of however long this podcast episode is going to be.
I mean, it's less lengthy than entitling the chapter "The Multitude of Ways the Government Fucks You for Your Own Money."
I'm going to officially make that the name when I upload this on Spotify. I feel like that's the way forward. So without any further ado, Maria, could you please
cue intro music.
Okay, actually, before we get into it, we were just talking about how I got a message yesterday from somebody who said that they really enjoyed the podcast. Thanks, Craig. I appreciate it. But also that the intro music was an absolute banger. And honestly, I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not going to listen for the content, listen for the musical content.
For the 10-second intro and outro music that you get with it.
I mean, that is my job to introduce it, so I'm going to take that as a personal compliment. Also, how long did we spend listening to various options for it?
Oh, there were so many.
There were so many. So a lot of thought and consideration went into it.
As does with all of these podcast episodes.
Yes,
sometimes.
definitely.
So on that note, we're going to start with capital gains tax because this is one thing that everybody falls over about. And I get it, but the one thing that you need to know for the purposes if you see put my teeth back in, for the purposes of your CeMAP exam is you do not need to know how to do tax calculations to get through your exam.
That's nice.
So there's a load of old exam questions online or exam papers online that they still float about, and in them they're really complicated. There are really complicated tax calculation questions because you used to get them in the exams.
Oh, okay. So if you've come across one of those, you shit yourself.
Yeah, and I get messages all the time, and they're like, Charlotte, I don't know how to do this, and it's not in the e-learning platform, and please help. And honestly, no.
Stop it.
I draw the line there because I'm not going to put any information in your brain that you do not need to get CeMAP qualified. And then once you're CeMAP qualified, we have this fangled thing called the internet.
Ooh.
With a tax calculation calculator in it.
Oh, perfect. So that's actually all the mortgage advisors are using anyway.
So you are literally never going to need to know it.
In fairness, the tax department at HMRC are probably also using the same calculator. So
exactly.
Even they don't know how to do the calculations.
So I ain't going to teach you how to do the calculations because you don't need it, but I am going to teach you what tax applies to what sort of stuff. And capital gains tax is the first one. Ultimately, it's a tax that you pay on the profit or on the gain or you make when you sell or dispose of something that has a value. So I always say we're not talking about shit on Facebook Marketplace.
Okay.
Because if you buy a sofa from DFS or SCS or I don't know, insert sofa place here, when you eventually come to sell it on Facebook Marketplace 5 years down the line, you are not going to make money on that.
No.
And that's where people trip up. They go, I sell stuff all the time and I don't pay tax on it.
Okay.
It's for two different reasons. One, people generally don't make profit on shit that they sell unless that's what they do for their job.
Yeah.
So you only pay it if you make a gain.
Right.
If you make profit.
Okay. No, I was going to be really pedantic then.
No, go be pedantic.
I was going to be like, what if I buy a sofa for like 50 quid off Facebook Marketplace and then sell it for like £1,000?
If you were to do that, you would potentially be liable for capital gains tax if you were already over your capital gains tax allowance for the year.
Oh.
So everybody has a capital gains tax allowance, which basically means you can make so much money tax-free.
Right.
The allowance changes every year. So 2 years ago it was £12,000.
Yeah.
Then it went down to £6,000. Now it's gone down, I think, to about £3,000.
What the fuck are the government playing at? Don't answer that question. It's a hypothetical one because we all know nothing.
I actually don't know what it is for this year. And again, that's because people are always like, yeah, but Charlotte, what is it? I don't know. You know why I don't know? Because you don't need to fucking know it for your exam. So
Fair enough. And if it changes every year, you're going to have to refresh that knowledge when you're qualified anyway, so...
Exactly. One of the questions that people get repeatedly in like 4 different ways, it's the same question, is somebody liable to pay tax on insert example here? And the answer is always the same. If they are over their allowance, they will pay tax on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So if you have a job, do you pay income tax on it?
Yeah.
If you're over your allowance, you do.
Yeah.
Same with capital gains tax.
Okay, well, that's a nice, easy answer.
There you go. So keep that in mind. That's a top tip for you guys sitting your CeMAP 1 exam. But with capital gains tax, you only pay the tax if you make a profit. And there are certain things that you would pay it on. The first one is property. But there is an exemption because everybody at this point is going to be like, Charlotte, if I sell my house for more money than I bought it for, do I have to pay tax on it?
Not on your primary residence.
Correct. Maria has been doing her homework, not on your primary residence. So there's something called a private residence relief, and that basically means if it is the home you live in and you sell it, you don't have to pay capital gains tax on it.
Whoa, how nice of them.
But if it's not your main home, if you're flipping properties, for example, you always have a capital gains tax you'll always have to pay capital gains tax if you're over your allowance.
Right.
The rate of capital gains tax that you pay, again, you do not need to know it for your CeMAP exam, but it depends on what rate of tax you pay, whether you're a 20% taxpayer, 40% or 45%.
Okay.
That will
dictate
what rate of capital gains tax you pay. But if it's not your main residence and you buy and then sell a property for profit, you will pay capital gains tax on the profit.
Right.
Shares in companies. So when you buy or sell stocks and shares in companies, you pay tax on it. It's capital gains tax. So
right.
Let's say you bought shares. Maria, what company are you really feeling at the minute?
Unilever.
So let's say you bought stocks or shares in Unilever 10 years ago. In the last 10 years, I imagine they've done pretty well for themselves, and they're now probably right up there in like the top 100 companies making money. You go to sell that share probably for a lot more money than you bought it for.
I have to pay capital gains.
Exactly, therefore you made a profit, so you pay capital gains tax on the profit if you are over your allowance.
Cool. I mean, Jesus.
Business assets we'll come on to in a second, and personal possessions. So you mentioned the sofa and I said yes, potentially. Actually, the rule is if it's worth over £6,000.
Okay.
So 50 quid to £1,000 is not going to make the cut.
Yeah.
So if it's worth over £6,000, the other rule is excluding your car. Although there's
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, the cars are excluded. There's very few circumstances where you would make a lot of money selling a car anyway, unless it was like a classic Defender that you had locked up in a garage somewhere.
That's true. I don't. I wish.
Yeah, you and me both. So when you calculate your gain, basically you figure out how much you bought it for, how much you sold it for, and what that difference is. That's the profit, but there are certain things that you can knock off to mitigate capital gains tax allowance.
Okay.
And this comes up in a lot of people's exams, so I want to make sure that we really know this one. So any costs that are involved in the buying or the selling of that thing, like, I don't know, eBay fees, auctioneer's fees, legal fees, estate agent fees.
Okay.
All that stuff you can knock off.
So like expenses related to?
Exactly. But when it comes to possessions, the cost of improvements can be offset, but not maintenance and repairs. So if we put that into practice, because it's a hard one to get your head around, if you bought a house
Yeah.
and you improved it, you completely stripped it out, you put everything new in there, a complete renovation,
Yeah.
that's classed as an improvement and you can offset that against your capital gains tax allowance.
Yeah.
But if you are just maintaining it
To like
and repairing shit,
paint for just repainting fences.
Yeah. But it's a really fine line because
I was gonna say how you. I mean, you could if you've got a. I say a good accountant. I suppose you could get them to argue it fairly effectively.
Yeah, because putting new windows in, well, technically, if the windows needed replacing, it's a repair. But if you've put better windows in, it's then an improvement.
Also an improvement.
Yeah, so
if you strip out the interior and repaint it, is it maintenance because you've got walls that need painting, and at some point they're going to need to paint them? But yeah, it's that. Get a good accountant.
Yeah, get a good accountant. So there is a slight grey area. As long as you remember, you can always offset buying and selling fees, and you can offset improvements, but maintenance and repairs you cannot offset against your allowance.
Okay.
You're going to be on the money with that one. If that question comes up, you're going to be fine with it.
Yeah, you know it.
So when it comes to the exemptions, we've spoke about your main home. So your private residence relief you have, which means you don't have to pay capital gains tax if it's your main home. You have something called business asset disposal relief. Basically, if you're selling a business or shares in a business, you might qualify for a slightly lower rate in capital gains tax. That one's well complicated. They don't go into it in CeMAP. They just say that business asset disposal relief does exist, and it's to do with shares in companies. You might pay a slightly lower rate. There's also something called holdover relief or gift holdover relief, and this one is dead straightforward. So if I gifted you a classic Defender with no miles on the clock,
oh please,
you are not going to pay tax at that point because you've not sold it. So you probably wouldn't have the money to pay the tax bill on it when I gifted it to you.
Yeah.
So what they basically do is say, okay, you don't pay your tax bill until you financially profit from it, which would be when you go to sell it.
Oh, so I will have the money because I've sold it to
Yeah.
pay the tax bill.
Because technically, when I give you that Defender, it's an asset, so you financially you are better off, but you don't actually see that money until you sell it.
But yeah, okay, I don't realise the financial potential of the gift.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
The big thing to remember with capital gains taxes, especially when it comes to things like stocks and shares, is people buy and sell shares in companies. Like for some people, that is their full-time job. They do it every single day.
Yeah.
So actually, with shares, you pay your tax automatically. So you generally don't get your accountant to do this.
Okay.
You do it through something called stamp duty reserve tax.
Okay.
So I actually think this is a good point to go. Let's talk about stamp duty land tax first.
Okay.
Stamp duty land tax is the tax that you pay when you buy a house.
Yeah.
Again, you do not need to know the thresholds, but if you are not a first-time buyer and you buy a house, depending on how much that house costs, you'll pay tax on it. And people don't always know that they have to pay stamp duty land tax because they've never done it before. So it's your job as a mortgage advisor to make sure you are telling people.
Is this why everyone went mental when they
had the stamp duty
land
holiday?
Tax, exemption during, was it lockdown?
It was
one of
COVID.
the many.
Exactly for that reason, because I think with properties worth over a certain amount, the tax is like 5% of the property value. It might be even more.
Right.
So it's a fucking chunk of cash.
It's a chunk of cash, yeah.
That you need to have to one side. That stamp duty land tax, again, have a look at a tax table online. It changes every year. The thresholds change. There's a couple of quirky rules that we're not going to dig into in this podcast episode. But that stamp duty land tax, stamp duty reserve tax, is basically an automatic tax system when you buy and sell shares. Because nobody would be able to keep track of how much money they're making, because they won't always make a profit on all the shares that they sell.
Yeah.
They might make a loss, and then you consistently offsetting them against each other, and it's just
a headache,
a nightmare. So now they have this automatic system. It's called CREST. Don't know why it's called that, but it takes stamp duty reserve tax, which is the tax on shares.
Okay, so
not stamp duty land tax.
Stamp duty land tax is property because it's land transference.
Correct.
And then stamp duty reserve is for shares, stocks and shares.
Bingo.
Okay.
Got it?
Can do that, yeah.
Amazing. And then, I think the last thing that we're going to talk about in this episode is inheritance tax.
Yay!
This is another really big one that people tend to struggle with, so we're going to take it nice and slow. Inheritance tax is a tax that you might have to pay when you inherit somebody's stuff.
And we're not talking about like your grandma's photo album. We're talking about big shit.
Yes. So the textbook uses the phrase when you inherit somebody's estate. And that's the phrase that they use. Yeah. But we think of the word estate and we think house. And I kind of need you to disassociate the two words for inheritance
estate
tax purposes.
Everything, all encompassing, from the photo album right through to the classic car collection.
Yeah.
It can be literally saucepans.
Basically, anything that has a monetary value. That's it. That's how you remember it.
Transferred on the death of whoever's left it to you.
Exactly. So everybody has an inheritance tax allowance, but the tricky part is that the inheritance tax allowance is technically connected to the dead person, but it's the alive person that inherits it that has to pay it.
Yeah.
So then that's where people get, I think, a bit unstuck with it. So
right.
Let's say you were going to die, and you were going to leave all your shit to me, which I know is what you're going to secretly going to do anyway.
Yes, 3 dogs.
3 dogs and a whole lot of
Citrobilingo.
When you die, I get an inheritance tax allowance, which is technically your inheritance tax allowance, of £325,000.
Yeah.
Which means I can inherit all of your stuff up to that amount and pay absolutely no tax on it.
You will not have to pay any tax, pal.
Sound. No tax liabilities for me. Happy days. Anything over that amount, you always pay a flat rate of 40%. Doesn't matter what tax banding you fall into. Doesn't matter how much you inherit. It's 40% if you're over the threshold. Always.
Right. That's a wedge in it.
Yeah, exactly. The 325 is the allowance on your stuff, but it's me that pays it because I'm inheriting it.
You're gaining.
Exactly. There's a couple of quirky rules as well with inheritance tax, shockingly. The first one is if you pass your stuff over to a spouse or civil partner, basically somebody that you're married to, you inherit everything tax-free. It doesn't matter how much is in there.
I remember it with Granny and Grandpa.
And that's because it's generally assumed that if you're a married couple, you jointly own everything anyway.
Yeah.
So if you're a spouse or civil partner, you inherit absolutely everything tax-free. But it's when it then gets passed on to children, which inevitably at some point it will do, there's a tax liability. But the quirky feature is, if you've got mum and dad, they both had a £325,000 allowance. Dad died first, mum inherited everything tax-free. Then mum dies and leaves it to the kids.
Can you claim double?
You'd claim double.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you've got mum's allowance plus dad's allowance, which means...
you never utilised the first allowance. So technically, you're doubling your threshold because you never got anything from the initial passee.
Yeah. And what that means is that in this instance, the kids inherit £650,000 worth of tax-free allowance.
Yeah.
There's also something called a residency nil rate band, which is basically if you've got a property that's included in there, you get an extra £175,000.
Okay.
Basically, when you do all the maths, the maximum somebody can inherit with no tax liability is £1 million.
Okay.
Which
in fairness, if you take into account what most people's primary residence would sell for at market value that's not in fucking Surrey, most average people don't have an estate worth over £1 million.
Exactly. And then when people do, generally they have financial advisors that say, let's tie your shit up into trust, which is something we'll talk about in another topic, and avoid your inheritance tax liabilities.
Avoid it legally.
Avoid, because inheritance tax, no, what is it? What's the phrase? Tax evasion is a crime, tax avoidance isn't.
Oh, I like
So that. If you don't pay your tax,
that's a problem.
You get in trouble, but if you just find ways of not having to pay as much tax,
there are ways, and that's what good accountants do for you,
and
financial advisors.
Exactly. So we've done capital gains tax, we've done stamp duty and land tax and reserve tax, we've done inheritance tax, potentially exempt transfers and chargeable lifetime transfers.
Right.
This is the last thing that we're going to do for this episode. A potentially exempt transfer is basically, in a shocking turn of events, a shit rule that the government put into place. Because what happened is all parents realised at some point they were going to die and their kids might end up with an inheritance tax bill.
Yeah.
So what they started to do is just putting their houses in their names. As they were cracking on a bit, they'd go, well, let's just transfer.
Isn't there a threshold now?
Basically, there's a cut-off point. So the rule says if a parent transfers a property to a child whilst they are still living, they have to survive for 7 more years.
Yeah, I remember because we had this discussion with Grandpa.
Yeah, from the date of the transfer for there to be no inheritance tax liability.
Yeah.
Everybody will get a question on this in their CeMAP 1 exam.
Pay attention.
Yeah, listen up, turn up the volume, take out a notepad if you're not driving, whatever.
Or if you are, live boldly. Don't.
Maria,
I accept no liability for anyone that crashes.
So if you die within 7 years, there is an inheritance tax liability to pay if you've gifted a house to somebody. Within the first 3 years, you basically pay 100% of your 40% inheritance tax bill.
Right.
And then it goes down in 20% increments. So years 3 to 4, you would pay 80% of your 100% inheritance tax liability. You would pay then 60%, 60% of your 40% inheritance tax bill, and then 40%. And basically, after 7 years, it goes down to 0.
That makes sense. So you need to know this for your exam, though.
You need to know the thresholds. Yeah, for your exam. If you remember that first 3 years it's 100% and then it goes down in 20% increments, you'll be grand for that.
Yeah.
If you are concerned that your parents might pop their clogs before that 7-year period, you can take out insurance against it. It's called gift inter vivos cover, which translates from Latin to gift between the living. So if your parents are alive, they gift you your house, you're worried they might pop it within 7 years, take out gift inter vivos cover and it will basically pay your inheritance tax liability if they pop it in 7 years.
That's crazy.
Uh-huh.
I would like to know who discovered that particular loophole and was like...
That niche and was like, we'll insure against that.
Yeah. That's a really specific... I mean, a lot of insurance is very specific, but who... Yeah, that would be a interesting conversation. That is someone that got screwed over.
That's exactly who did that. That's exactly what happened. So that's a potentially exempt transfer. There's also something called a chargeable lifetime transfer.
Right.
And that's if it's between businesses. And I use the example, if you gift Liverpool Football Club a private jet, they are going to pay their tax immediately. They're not going to wait until you die because they've already got more money.
Than God.
Yeah, so with potentially exempt transfers, it's inheritance tax basically. So when the person passes away, that's when the tax is due.
Yeah.
If it's a gift to a business or if it's a gift between businesses, they pay their tax immediately because they've got the money to do it.
Okay.
And that's the difference.
So the difference is whether you've got more money than God or you just fucking struggling along.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
most of us.
And I think that's probably all we're going to have time for this episode, but that is a huge chunk of one of the trickiest chapters of the textbook done. So I'm hoping that you guys have found it really, really useful. If you do need extra help beyond this podcast, because as we always say, you can't just listen to this and expect to pass your exam.
Not an exhaustive study guide.
But I do provide exhaustive study guides in a couple of different ways. If you go to futureinfinance.co.uk, there is so much free material on there, but there's also the charged stuff as well. So I offer an e-learning platform which you get access to forever. It is absolutely everything that you could need to get CeMAP qualified. You can put your textbook in the bin. Don't put your textbook in the bin.
You will need your textbook.
I always recommend that you read it because it kind of is a regulatory requirement, but the e-learning platform is there to replace the textbook. And it means that you can study on the go. So there's audio files that you can listen to in the car. There's video files that you can watch in the gym. There is also an ebook that comes with it, but nobody ever uses that, so I don't know why I bothered writing it. There's, in the combined e-learning platforms, I think there's over 700 worth of exam-style questions in there for you to get prepped on the day. You also get support from me in WhatsApp if you need it. So that's the e-learning platform, that's option 1. If you just wanted to buy one of them for CeMAP 1, it'd be 320 quid. If you wanted to buy the full package for CeMAP 1, 2 and 3, it's 520 quid.
Bargain.
They don't go on discount because they're already the best thing that's out there and they're already really reasonably priced.
Yeah.
But props to anybody that messaged me and asked for a discount code first. I always respect that.
We do respect it. We definitely don't call you cheeky bastards.
I would never call anybody. I do it all the time. I always message people and be like, love what you do. Do you have a
Any
discount
chance?
code? Or are you going to have a sale? Because it pisses me right off when I buy something and the day after they put a sale on. And it happens to me all the time. So I always message. So message, guys. The only exception to my rule is Black Friday in November. Because I know it's only July, but I've already got big things planned for November.
Yeah.
And then if the e-learning platform is just not cutting it and you want to get qualified fast, you can set a masterclass, which is effectively a 5-day fast track course with a 100% money back guarantee that says come and sit with me for 5 days, pay attention, show up, do the work and pass your exam at the weekend. If you don't pass your exam and you feel like you weren't fully supported, you can ask for your money back. All that I ask from you is that you've put the fucking effort in.
Yeah, don't pay for it and show up half-assed.
Exactly, because that's just the worst.
It's not serving you.
Anyone.
You've spent the money. Why are you fannying about?
Agreed. I could not agree
So,
more.
no fannying about.
But if you want to check out the available dates, again, go to the website. There are still available dates left for this year. So go on there, have a look, get booked on a course. And if you've got any questions off the back of this, or if you want to know more about the courses or the e-learning or whatever, you can find my number almost anywhere on the internet. So just drop me a message. It's always great to hear from people. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this week's episode. Leave us a cheeky 5-star review. If it's not 5 stars, then just don't leave one.
Yep, go away.
And we will catch you for next week's episode.